The island comes up slowly from the Pacific, its ridges covered in rough green, broken by stone and narrow slopes that drop without warning. It sits well outside major sailing routes, positioned in open water off the western edge of South America. The nearest coastline is more than 600 kilometers away. The water surrounding it runs cold and deep, shaped by consistent currents and seasonal winds that don't let up. This is part of the Juan Fernandez Island group, a small and remote cluster known less for what it offers and more for where it sits. Mist drifts over the hills before sunrise, then breaks apart to show steep cliff faces and scattered trees. Fresh water moves through narrow streams, though not in every part of the island. The shoreline doesn't welcome easy approach. Sharp rocks, changing surf, and very few spots flat enough to land a boat. During the early 1700s, nobody lived here permanently. No buildings, no worn paths, just traces left by ships that had passed through, old fire pits, and a handful of animals that earlier crews had dropped off and forgotten. On the surface, the island doesn't seem like a death sentence. It has water, food, cover from the wind, but what it really has, more than anything else, is distance. And once a person ends up here, getting off depends entirely on luck. In 1704, one man landed on this island and stayed for years, not because his ship went down, because he made a call that turned out to be the kind you can't walk back from. Alexander Selkirk was born in 1676 in Lower Largo, a small fishing village on the coast of Scotland. The place sat along the North Sea, and like most towns built around water in that part of the world, nearly everyone there was connected to the ocean in some way. Fishing, trade, coastal transport. These weren't careers people chose so much as lives they were born into. Selkirk grew up in that world, picking up practical knowledge about the sea before he ever formally learned anything. What we know about his early years is pretty thin. Records point to a guy with a short fuse and a habit of getting sideways with people around him. There are mentions of arguments with his family and run-ins with local church authorities over behavior that didn't sit right with the community. None of that was especially rare for young men in port villages where life was inconsistent and the people who lived it tended to be rough around the edges. By the time he was in his late 20s, Selkirk had committed fully to life out on the water. He signed on with privateering outfits, which were basically legal pirate operations backed by the government. Britain was deep in the War of the Spanish Succession at the time, and privateering gave both the crown and the crews a way to make it work financially while hitting Spanish shipping hard. These operations had official cover, but the day-to-day reality was dangerous, underfunded, and run by men who didn't always make the smartest calls. Selkirk worked as a sailing master, which meant he was the guy actually responsible for moving the ship. Navigation, reading weather, managing sails across long, open water stretches. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't some deckhand guessing at the compass. In 1703, he joined up with an expedition under William Dampier, an English navigator who had been out in the Pacific more times than most and knew those waters well. Selkirk was assigned to a vessel called the Cinque Ports, one of two ships making the run. The plan was to push around the bottom of South America, get into the Pacific, and raid Spanish ships and coastal settlements. From the jump, the voyage had problems. These weren't well-built ships to begin with, and open ocean conditions expose every weakness a hull has been hiding. The Cinque Ports started falling apart as it pushed south along the South American coast. The wood had been eaten through by worms in warmer, shallower waters earlier in the voyage. There were leaks that weren't getting properly fixed. The whole structure was deteriorating in ways the crew could patch but not actually solve. Selkirk was in a position where he had to pay close attention to all of it, and what he saw made him deeply uncomfortable. Not everyone shared his read on the situation. On ships like this, officers clashed constantly, especially when the potential payout of a successful raid was tempting people to bad decisions. By September of 1704, the expedition made it to the Juan Fernandez Islands.
They anchored up to grab water, make repairs, and rest the crew. It was during this stop that Selkirk made the kind of decision that changes everything. It wasn't a snap judgment. It came out of weeks of watching the ship get worse, pushing back on the captain, getting nowhere, and eventually reaching the point where he trusted his own reed more than he trusted the vessel.
In September 1704, the Cinque Ports dropped anchor off one of the Juan Fernandez Islands to take on water and do basic maintenance. Standard procedure for voyages of this kind. Ships running long distances needed these stops to keep going. At this point in the trip, the condition of the Cinque Ports had moved from background concern to front and center for Selkirk. The hull wasn't just showing wear, it was structurally weakened in ways that mattered on open ocean. The worms that burrowed into wooden hulls in warmer water had been working for months. The crew had tried to address it, but with what they had on hand, they were putting band-aids on a problem that needed surgery. Selkirk ran his own calculation. He had the experience to know what a compromised ship looked like and what it meant for everyone aboard. His conclusion was that the Cinque Ports wasn't going to make it through the rest of the voyage. Staying on it was the bigger gamble in his view. The island, at least, wasn't going to sink beneath him. Captain Thomas Stradling didn't see it that way. The two had been butting heads for a while, and this disagreement was the one that finally broke things open. The crew finished resupplying and got ready to push back out. Stradling intended to keep the mission going regardless. Selkirk made his move. He asked to be lifted ashore. This kind of thing did happen occasionally, a sailor refusing to continue under dangerous conditions and choosing to wait out on land instead. It wasn't standard, but it wasn't unheard of. The catch was always the same though. Once you're on that island, watching the ship get smaller, your future is completely out of your hands. You get off when another vessel shows up, and you have absolutely no say in when or whether that happens. Selkirk was given some supplies before they left: clothing, bedding, a musket with powder, some tools, and a Bible. Not a survival kit designed by someone thinking long-term, just whatever the ship could spare. As the Cinque Ports started moving away from shore, accounts suggest Selkirk may have had second thoughts right there at the water's edge, but Stradling wasn't turning around. The ship kept going. The gap between the hull and the shore kept widening. Then it was gone. Just like that, Alexander Selkirk was completely alone on an island in the middle of nowhere with no way off and no idea when that would change. After the Cinque Ports disappeared, the island didn't change at all. Same hills, same streams, same rocky edge dropping into the water. What was completely different was Selkirk's place in it. No chain of command to operate inside of, no crew to share the work with, nobody telling him what needed to happen next. Everything was on him now. The first stretch of that isolation was about figuring out how to function. His supplies were a starting point, not a solution. The musket gave him a hunting option, but ammunition doesn't last forever. His tools were useful for building and fixing things. The clothes and bedding were fine short-term, but were never designed to hold up for years of constant outdoor use. He had to build systems from scratch, with no blueprint and no backup. Fresh water was the first thing he locked down. The island had streams running through it, but they weren't spread evenly. He had to find which ones were reliable and build his movement patterns around staying close enough to access them. That became one of the fixed anchors of his whole setup. Food took more work. The island had wild goats on it, animals left behind by earlier sailors. You could hunt them, but it wasn't easy. Early on, Selkirk used the musket when he needed meat. That worked, but every shot used up supplies he couldn't replace. Over time, he shifted, started chasing goats on foot, studying where they moved and when, figuring out the terrain well enough to cut them off without needing to fire at all. He fished along the coast when the water and weather cooperated. He gathered plants, wild cabbage, and other edible vegetation, learning through trial what was worth eating and where it grew reliably. Shelter came together in stages. At first, he used whatever the natural landscape offered: rock faces that blocked wind, thick trees that kept rain off. Eventually, he put together 2 huts using wood and plant material. Basic structures, but more than nothing. They gave him a place to sleep dry and store his gear. Fire was non-negotiable. It meant cooked food, warmth when the temperature dropped, and a degree of control that mattered psychologically as much as practically.
Keeping it going when wind picked up or rain came through was the challenge. Once he had a flame established, he treated maintaining it as a priority, not something to be casual about. As initial supplies ran out, the operation got harder. No more ammunition meant goats had to be caught by hand, requiring a whole different level of physical conditioning. His clothes gave out gradually. He switched to making coverings from goat skins, which held up better and suited what he was actually doing every day. There was no moment where everything clicked and survival became easy. It was a continuous process of figuring things out, adjusting when something stopped working, building knowledge through repetition. Tasks defined time. Needs defined priorities. The island didn't offer comfort, but it eventually offered something he could work inside of.
As months stacked up into years, the survival operation shifted from something fragile into something more stable. The island hadn't changed. Same ridgelines, same winds, same coastline. What changed was how completely Selkirk understood it and moved through it. He had split his time into the things that had to happen: food, shelter maintenance, keeping himself physically functional. Hunting without weapons became the center of it all. The terrain was steep and unpredictable, which made chasing goats across it a serious physical challenge. People who encountered Selkirk after his rescue commented on how fast and sure-footed he had become, moving in ways that seemed almost out of place for a man his age. That level of ability came from years of daily movement across that specific landscape. His chase patterns naturally took him across wide stretches of the island, rather than keeping him in one spot. He followed the goat herds, tracked their preferred paths, learned which areas they concentrated in during different seasons. Moving around like that also meant he wasn't overhunting any single area. Fishing stayed in the routine as a supplement. Getting to the water wasn't always straightforward, because the surf could make coastal access genuinely risky. When conditions were right, fish gave him variety and took pressure off the land-based food gathering. Plant gathering was steady work. Wild cabbage and other edible growth provided things that meat alone couldn't. His huts had gotten more organized, one for sleeping, one for cooking and keeping supplies. Keeping them separate reduced the chance of losing everything to a fire and made managing what he had easier. The structures needed constant attention because wood and plant material break down outdoors, especially in coastal conditions. Fire stayed a daily priority. All his cooking and a lot of his warmth depended on it. He kept the flame going the same way he kept everything else going, through consistent attention. His goatskin clothing got replaced as pieces wore out. Beyond keeping himself alive, routine served a different but equally important function. Without other people, without any kind of calendar or external schedule, repetition became the thing that made time feel structured rather than formless. Tasks weren't just necessary for survival, they were the framework that gave each day shape. Selkirk kept up with reading. The Bible he had brought was the only written material he had, and he used it regularly. Language deteriorates in total isolation. Speaking out loud, reading, reciting passages, these kept the mental machinery working in ways that pure physical survival couldn't address. The island wasn't changing. Seasons came and went, weather shifted, but the environment was largely the same year after year. What evolved was the internal map Selkirk carried of the place, built from thousands of repeated trips across the same ground. By that point, survival wasn't the daily emergency it had been at the start. The harder thing now wasn't staying alive from day to day. It was staying intact across an open-ended stretch of time with no human presence anywhere. As years kept moving, the physical setup Selkirk had built continued holding up. He could eat, he had shelter, water wasn't a problem. But covering the basics didn't resolve the deeper effect of spending years without any human contact. No conversations, no shared effort, no confirmation from another person that time was passing or that the world outside still existed in any meaningful sense. The weight of that built gradually rather than arriving all at once. The environment offered very little variation. Same terrain, same routines cycling over and over, same edges marking the limits of where he could go. That repetition reshaped how time felt. Without a calendar, tracking specific dates became impossible. Days blurred into each other. What remained was the rhythm of activity, not the sequence of dates. Selkirk used the Bible to maintain mental structure. Reading it regularly, reciting sections aloud, these were ways of keeping language functional and thought patterns intact. Without that deliberate effort,
Prolonged solitude can erode the very cognitive tools a person needs to keep functioning clearly. His isolation was broken briefly on at least 2 occasions by ships appearing near the island. Both times they turned out to be Spanish vessels, which was a real problem given that Selkirk was part of a British privateering operation. Getting caught could have meant imprisonment or worse. Both times he went to ground, moved inland, used the terrain he knew better than anyone to stay out of sight, and waited until the ships moved on. His knowledge of the island protected him the same way it fed him. The ships left, the silence came back. Physical wear added up over the years too. Running across rough terrain, handling goats barehanded, constant outdoor exposure. Small injuries were just part of living the way he was living. Without medical supplies, the only option was rest and letting his body handle it. His system didn't collapse under the accumulated strain. The routines held even when they bent.
There is no journal from Selkirk's time on the island. No first-hand written record of what he was thinking or how the years felt from the inside. What survived are accounts from people who spoke to him after his rescue. These describe a man who had been fundamentally changed by the experience, but hadn't been broken by it. The isolation accumulated and pressed on him in ways physical survival couldn't address. But it didn't knock him off his footing. He continued to function. In February of 1709, more than 4 years after Selkirk had been left on that island, 2 British privateering ships came around the Juan Fernandez archipelago. These were the Duke and the Duchess, operating under Woodes Rogers, a captain with a serious track record in Pacific operations. They stopped near the island to take on fresh water, same as ships always did at remote islands. Nobody on board expected to find anyone living there. When Selkirk spotted them from shore, he read the situation carefully before doing anything. He had been burned before by Spanish ships, and you don't survive 4 years alone by being reckless. The flags and behavior of these vessels looked different. British. He made his approach. The crew described exactly what you would expect. A man dressed in goatskin clothing he had made himself. Hair and beard grown out and untrimmed. Moving in a way that was noticeably fast and controlled, shaped by years of physical adaptation to the terrain. When he started talking, it took time to get back into normal speech patterns. He had been alone long enough that language came back slowly. But he got his story out, identified himself, and the crew cross-referenced his account against records from the original Cinque Ports expedition. It all checked out. The ship he had refused to stay on had in fact gone down, exactly the way he had predicted. His call had been right. He was brought aboard the Duke. His body was in solid shape because he had stayed physically active and kept himself fed throughout. After more than 4 complete years of total isolation, he was back among people. No fanfare, no ceremony. One situation simply gave way to another. After Woodes Rogers pulled Selkirk off the island in 1709, Selkirk didn't slip back into quiet civilian life. He stayed on with the expedition and continued at sea. The time on the island had sharpened specific abilities in immediately useful ways. He understood remote coastlines, read unfamiliar terrain quickly, and had practical Pacific Island knowledge that most of the crew lacked entirely. He became a resource the expedition actually relied on. Eventually, he made it back to Britain. His story got out through accounts published by Rogers and others present at the rescue. Detailed written records describing what Selkirk had done and how, presented not as adventure fiction, but as documented fact. 1 man, 1 island, over 4 years, alone. The account spread because nothing quite like it had been written down in that kind of detail before. It landed on a writer named Daniel Defoe. In 1719, Defoe published Robinson Crusoe, a novel about a man stranded alone on a remote island who builds a survival system from nothing. It was fiction, but the architecture drew directly from what had been documented about Selkirk's actual experience. The specific details differ, but the core structure maps onto what Selkirk lived through closely enough that the connection has been recognized ever since. Robinson Crusoe went on to become one of the most widely read books in the English language.
It shaped how people think about solitary survival and what a person is actually capable of when everything else is stripped away. The man who inspired all of that is someone most people couldn't name. Selkirk eventually went back to sea after returning to Britain. He served in the Royal Navy in his later years. In 1721, he died aboard a ship called the Weymouth off the coast of West Africa. The cause was most likely disease. He was in his mid-40s. The years on the island are by far the part of his life that history paid any attention to. Everything before it was build-up. Everything after it was aftermath. What happened on that island between 1704 and 1709 defined him, and it wasn't defined by one dramatic moment or one heroic decision. It was defined by duration, by the slow, unglamorous daily work of staying alive in a place that had no interest in whether he made it. The island never got easier. The conditions never improved on their own. What got better, gradually and through pure repetition, was his ability to function inside them. There was no rescue on a schedule, no guarantee anyone would ever show up. He just kept doing the work because stopping meant dying, and he wasn't ready to do that. Most people who know Robinson Crusoe have never heard the name Alexander Selkirk. They've read the story and come away thinking it was someone's imagination. It wasn't. It was one Scottish sailor, one deteriorating ship, one argument with a captain that went too far, and 4 years alone on a Pacific island that very few people will ever find on a map. The fiction became famous. The man it came from got forgotten. But the island is still out there, rising slowly from the cold Pacific water, covered in rough green, surrounded by deep ocean in every direction, sitting exactly where it has always sat, waiting for the next person stubborn enough to survive it.